This is a tour of the Dunckley Northern Railway. It's a 3-foot 6-inch gauge railway at 1/24th scale based on 45mm track. It also includes a small section of standard gauge railway that allows transfer between the narrow gauge and the standard gauge. Let's go inside and take a look. The Dunckley Northern Railway consists of two railroads actually. One is the Consolidated Concentrates Conglomerate, which is a branch line off the Dunckley Northern and joins the Dunckley Northern to the rest of the world through the tunnel on our right over there. The tunnel is actually a mailbox. Most of the buildings, as you see here, are scratch built. The Dunckley Northern Railway is really not an Australian railway. A lot of people think it is. It's actually two different railroads. The Dunckley Northern is an eclectic collection of locomotives of all types. The Consolidated Concentrates Conglomerate is loosely based on the South American Sierra de Pasco Railway, which used all American prototype equipment, including their locomotives and their passenger cars. And so therefore that allows me to focus on the American steam engine designs. You'll note that this is a 4-rail turntable, but the rest of the yard is 3-rail, with the standard gauge on the outer rails and the narrow gauge or 3-foot 6-inch gauge on the inner rail. If the 3-rail came onto this turntable, you would end up with 1 rail on this side and 2 rails on this side before the turntable turned. And when you turned the turntable, you would end up the opposite, with the 1 rail on this side and the 2 rails on that side. So to avoid that problem, we have to have a 4-rail turntable. To make the vehicles move from 3-rail to 4-rail, we have a device called a draw, D-R-A-W. And as the vehicle comes down on the 3-rail towards the draw, you will see that using that guardrail, it drags the flanges over, and the vehicle now is operating on the middle 2 tracks. And that's how a draw works, and that's how you can have 2 different gauges in the 1 yard on 1 turntable. This is the passenger train that operates between Newton on the Consolidated Concentrates Railroad to the Dunckley Northern Railway. It runs behind Pacio, across the 2 bridges and up through Inshed, which is where the workshop is, and to Wombat, where it exchanges passengers with the Dunckley Northern Railway. The most enjoyable part of the model railroad hobby is actually, for me, is building locomotives and passenger cars. We're going to take this train now down to the town of Pacio. The locomotive is built on a LGB chassis, and it represents a British colonial engine. This is the town of Paitio. Paitio is the way Australians pronounce the word spelled P-A-T-I-O. This is a small end-of-line town with a turntable, and the turntable is used as well as a switch. The turntable is a model of a seller's turntable. They were made out of cast iron. They were in knockdown form and shipped all over the world. So the train is brought into the station. The locomotive is disconnected, loaded onto the turntable, and then the turntable is moved to the locomotive's turned first, and then the turntable is moved to the next track. The locomotive goes down to the switch down there. And then backs down onto the train so it can haul the train back in the other direction. This is the Dunckley Northern Premier Passenger Train, the Limited, on which we'll do a tour of the Dunckley Northern Railway. Here we are arriving in Wombat for our tour of the railway. We're looking at the town of Wombat. Most of the buildings in this town and at the engine terminal were scratch built, including the station. All of the buildings are lit. There are 32 light bulbs in the station, as are all of the buildings in all of the towns on the railroad. This station is copied from Bob Treat's Nemo station in his Snow Creek Railway in Southern California. This is the Wombat Loco Depot, which is the main maintenance depot on the whole railroad, and services locomotives for both the Dunckley Northern and the Consolidated Concentrates conglomerate. You'll see there is fuel facility for both coal and oil. We are leaving Wombat, and the next stop will be the Cherry Stump Resort. The locomotive hauling the train is the Blue Garret, which is a 442 plus 244. It's designed specifically for passenger trains as it's capable of a higher speed than the other Garrets. The Cherry Stump Resort started out as a dollhouse, which I've modified into a hotel. I put back walls into and repainted it. And it has its own private railway station. We're now leaving the Cherry Stump Resort for Back Fence. Back Fence is a mountain town at the summit of the railway. The only way into town is on the railway or through the tunnel. We are now traveling to Blue Spruce. The town of Blue Spruce is a typical company town that serves a coal mine. And you can see the company houses, the boarding house, and the office, which is a converted railroad combine. This is the end of the tour of the railway. If you have further interest, what follows is the same trip at night with all the structures lighted. Also following that, we've included a visit to the D&R shops with a description of some of the railway's equipment and some modeling techniques. For the night tour of the railroad, we're going to use the articulated train that is called the Comet. It was built using LGB ice train car bodies, an Aristocraft six-wheel diesel truck, And the concept was same as the Denver Zephyr or an Australian train called the Silver City Comet. This is the main workshop for the Dunckley Northern Railway. It's about 200 square feet and it's L-shaped. The trains, all the trains go through the workshop and all of the modeling is done in this room. This is the train that brought us up from Newton. The last car here, the dome car, is built from a Bachmann passenger car plus 3 Bachmann caboose cupolas. The other 4 cars are LGB, the standard LGB Western style cars, except they've all been lengthened by 2 windows, and they have closed vestibules, which was available from LGB for some time, and the baggage car is a standard LGB car. The locomotive is built on pretty much from scratch, but on a Aristocraft 282 chassis. The first locomotive is a Mikado built on a Barry's Big Train chassis. It's scratch built with a Vanderbilt tender. The second locomotive for the Sid Cedar Lumber Company, the only one of its kind, the only locomotive that company has, is built on a LGB chassis with mostly Bachmann 460 parts. The third locomotive is a Malley that was built on the European LGB Malley motor block, and it appeared some years ago in the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. Fourth locomotive is the standard LGB Maya. However, I've added rivets to the water tanks and reversed the front truck. It still is a Maya, both trucks swivel, but it looks a lot like a Malley. The fourth locomotive is my first attempt at building a Garrett. The Garretts are a very common British design, but never were operated in North America because they were invented too late. And the next one is an outside frame 280 that is actually the Bachmann engine, but with considerable modification to make it appear smaller. The 3 switches at the end are various kit bashes, but the second one is actually a LGB Staints, and the third one is the standard LGB 3-axle diesel, but with the hood lifted a little higher. I have a number of what I call vintage diesels. Diesels on the bottom shelf are based on the original diesel-electric locomotive that is in the museum in Baltimore. The locomotives in the upper shelf totally freelance. There is no prototype, and they were just built for fun. These 2 locomotives are basically Bachmann moguls, except that the rear one is a 280 based on an Aristo, sitting on an Aristo chassis. This Garrett locomotive is also freelance, and it is built on 2 LGB 080 chassis. And these are another 2 Garrett locomotives. I have 5 altogether. This is an LGB Crocodile that's been converted to diesel electric, which was done many years ago for a mine in South America. This diesel locomotive is from a English kit. It's also freelanced and sits on a pair of USA Trains diesel trucks. This is a rail bus from a plastic kit of a Paris City bus, which was the first bus to operate on pneumatic tires. This is a selection of rail motors, the first one steam driven. The middle one, the body of the rail motor itself and the trailer are locomotive cabs back to back, and the third one is based on a standard combine and passenger car. This is an example of some of the locomotives I've built. It's a colonial engine, meaning that it was an engine built usually for the British Railways and then converted to operate on some of the colonies. I leave these locomotives unpainted for a while just so that you can see how they were built. Now I'm going to turn the locomotive over and show you that this was built on a LGB chassis, a 260 chassis, but an extension to the chassis was added at the back to give me the extra axle. The tender is also very English in that it is a 4-axle tender, and to allow it to go around curves, one of the wheels on each axle has a roller bearing or a ball bearing, which makes it go around sharp curves a lot easier. You will note that on the tender side there's a whole bunch of rivets. Each one of these are plastic rivets that were hand installed one at a time in drilled holes and then glued in place. Okay. I'm going to lift this up. This goes up first. Okay, lift this all the way up. Put it behind onto the track. Line the track up. And back up the locomotive. And we can turn it if we want to. Sort of. And then if we want to let it down, we put my knee down here. Take the weight off and slowly put it down, catch it with my foot, and then drop it down. Then back it off. Thank you for visiting the Dunckley Northern Railway, and I hope you've enjoyed the trip.